right. Hi everyone. Welcome to Exploring New Foods with a Picky Eater. My name is Hillary Genovese. I am a clinical director at our Bierman Autism Center's Berkeley Heights, New Jersey location. Everyone is on mute. We encourage asking questions throughout the presentation, but please unmute yourself or type it in the chat. We would like this presentation to be as interactive as possible, so please ask questions throughout, but we'll also allow some time at the end. A little bit about Bierman to begin. Bierman Autism Centers is a place where young kids engage in play to learn foundational skills that they can build upon. We really focus a lot on self-advocacy skills, communication skills. We recognize that each of our kids' success is unique, and our one-on-one approach allows us to drive progress using measurable outcomes while each child is advancing on their own terms. It's really important for us that our kids learn that learning is fun. We really want them to want to come to our center and really kind of blur the line between play and learning. A couple of our pillars: letting kids be kids. So we really accept each of our kids as a unique person and aim to meet them where they are. We do a lot of learning through play, so a lot of our teaching is natural environment teaching, again, erasing the line between learning and play, keeping our kids engaged and motivated, and really figuring out what they like and what they don't like, and how we can use the things that they like to get them motivated and involved in their learning. Empowerment is also really key. We use everyday activities to teach our kids foundational skills like self-advocacy and communication, so requesting items, teaching them to communicate no with shaking their head or saying no. And engagement with families is another really important piece of our model. We believe in the importance of building connections and working towards shared goals. So we really want to be collaborating consistently with families, learning about what's important for all of our kids' families, and really making sure that we're incorporating that in their learning. And we also have a commitment to progress. So we're dedicated to each of our child's everyday and long-term progress, and we monitor those things very consistently. In our webinar today, a couple things we're going to overview. So a brief review of types of eating disorders, challenges your family may face with a picky eater, and how ABA and a multidisciplinary approach, so including occupational therapists, speech therapists, can really help, and some tips for changes you can make now at home. Also, we really want to mention that it's crucial for success with any feeding program that you speak to your child's physician first regarding feeding concerns. Any potential medical conditions must be ruled out before beginning a behavioral feeding treatment. Without treating any underlying conditions that may exist, behavioral progress will be really difficult. So first, we're going to chat about a couple of feeding issues. The DSM-5 details several different types of feeding issues. We're going to talk mostly about avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, but we also want to mention PICA. So this is persistent eating of non-nutritious, non-food substances over a period of at least 1 month. So this may be things like paint chips or dirt. Rumination, which is repeated regurgitation of food over the period of at least 1 month. Regurgitated food may be rechewed, reswallowed, or spit out. And then ARFID, which is avoidant or restrictive food intake disorder. So we'll chat about that a little bit more on the next slide, but we're really focusing heavily today on strategies that can address ARFID or similar behaviors. And your child does not need to be diagnosed with this for these strategies to work. We just need that medical clearance. So avoidant restrictive food intake disorder is a feeding or eating disturbance or a lack of apparent interest in eating food, avoidance based on sensory characteristics of food, concern about aversive consequences of eating, as manifested by persistent failure to meet appropriate nutritional and/or energy needs associated with one or more of the following. So you may experience significant weight loss or failure to achieve expected weight gain or faltering growth. Significant nutritional deficiency, so really, getting blood work back and seeing that vitamin levels are not where they should be. Dependence on enteral feeding or oral nutritional supplements, so you may be giving your child a lot of supplements because they're not eating maybe any vegetables or they're not consuming any proteins during the course of a day. And a marked interference with psychosocial functioning, And again, while behaviors that you may experience may be similar to this diagnosis is not necessary. So your child doesn't need to meet all of these criteria in order for these strategies to work. As long as there's no medical origin, these behavioral strategies should be effective. So some common issues that we're going to chat about, you might see avoiding or refusing to try new foods. Maybe there's a small set of foods. So I've worked with children before who only eat white foods, or who maybe have 4 or 5 foods that they eat consistently and have a really challenging time kind of branching out. Being really brand, texture, color dependent. So, your child might eat Yoplait strawberry yogurt, but if you try to give them Dannon strawberry yogurt, even if you don't show them the container, they might know that it's a different brand of yogurt. And while we may think it's really similar, they might not think it's so similar and be a little bit resistant to eating it. A lack of variety. So again, I'd say, commonly with fruits, vegetables, but could be proteins, really could be across a variety of different foods. And then refusing to sit for meals, which can be really challenging during like family time, or if mealtime is really important to you, if your family likes going out to eat, refusing to sit can be a barrier. So some family challenges. This may cause you to be creating separate meals. So maybe, you or somebody in your family is cooking for the family, and then you're also cooking a second meal for your child. Again, difficulty going out for meals. So something that might be really important to you and your family is going out to eat. And if your child is having a hard time sitting, or they won't eat any of the items on the menu and you have to bring your own food, that can be a challenge. Bringing specialty prepared foods while traveling. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean just to restaurants, maybe to family gatherings. Just when leaving the house, that might be something that you always have to be thinking about, making sure that there's going to be something that your child will eat. And then those nutritional deficits that can occur as a result of these things. Has anybody experienced any of these with their family? Looks like we have some daily, some yeses in the chat. Definitely. Sitting down, I know, is a very common challenge every day. Won't sit down. Yeah, so all of these things can definitely be a barrier, and it might be one of them, it might be many of them. But there's a lot of strategies that you can work on that we'll chat about to make these things a little bit easier for your child and for your family. So we want to chat a little bit about the potential causes, because I think it can be really important to understand, the why or the background, maybe where some of these things originated from. So medical issues can definitely be a huge cause for maybe some continued resistance and challenges with food. So for example, reflux is a common issue. It might make it uncomfortable for a child to eat certain foods or in certain amounts. And while they might not be currently or still experiencing reflux, that kind of bad experience in the past can create future eating experiences, can make them a little bit more difficult. Same thing with food allergies, especially if they were unexpected. If your child ate something and you didn't realize that they had an allergy, they had an allergic reaction, that event can be really significant, and may increase the chances that in the future they might be nervous that new foods might cause the same kind of physiological symptoms to happen, and as well as vitamin deficiencies. Sensory defensiveness is another big one that we see. So we know that kids can have different texture triggers. Something really mushy might be aversive, maybe something crunchy and they don't like the sound of the crunching. Extreme temperatures. So I used to work with a teenager who would want to put his food in the microwave for like 8 minutes and wanted his food really, really, really dangerously hot, and didn't register that the food was hot and was going to potentially harm his mouth and burn him. A lack of generalization is another challenge and a potential cause. So things like new shapes, maybe you got the regular shaped chicken nuggets instead of the dinosaur shaped chicken nuggets, and your child is not interested in eating them. Different colors of food. So again, maybe green apples are okay, but yellow apples are an absolutely not. and different forms of the same food. So again, that yogurt example, we might think that Yoplait and Dannon seem similar enough. They're a similar color, they smell similar, they look pretty similar, but our kids might really recognize those as two different flavors. Another potential cause, so underdeveloped skills. We might be seeing some challenges with chewing that it might be really hard for our kids to chew. So that might increase the likelihood that they're not really interested in eating because it's challenging. It's not a fun preferred task. Tongue movements may be hard. Managing food and swallowing can just affect how safe and comfortable it is to eat certain foods. And they might not feel safe with certain foods and avoid eating them. So now we'll chat a little bit about how ABA therapy can help, and then also how really a multidisciplinary approach, so including speech therapists, occupational therapists, can really be an important part of this process. So through ABA therapy, we teach a lot of adaptive skills. We focus on replacing socially significant restricted behaviors with more adaptive ones. So some positive results of changing child's eating behavior might increase social opportunities with peers. So for example, maybe they will be more likely to eat at a lunch table or at a birthday party. Maybe instead of you bringing one of the 3 foods that they eat, they'll be able to sit with peers and eat pizza and ice cream. It can decrease stigmatization. So again, similarly, you don't need to pack like a special lunch for them. They can go to a family party and you know that there's going to be something that they eat there. It's also easier to explore new environments. So again, you might be able to go to the zoo and know that there'll be something that I'll be able to find that my child will eat. We can go to the mall, and if we want to eat at the food court, there's going to be something there that they can eat, and I don't have to think about ahead of time packing all of their favorite things, or that they might be hungry and we have to eat the second they get home. And then increasing nutrition, which is obviously really important as well. So having a well-balanced diet overall impacts health and wellness and really makes our kids more available for learning. When they're eating well, they're sleeping better, and they're just, again, more available for learning. So a couple of strategies that we might use. One of them is called shaping. We use this really frequently to teach new behaviors. We make slow changes, which makes it easier for our kids to adapt so we don't go too fast and we avoid setbacks. So what that may look like in various contexts, we might do this if we're teaching nail cutting. So maybe our kids don't prefer nail cutting. It's something that right now you do while they're asleep, or you have to give them their most favorite ice cream or TV show for them to sit and allow you to cut their nails. Maybe initially we start with just cutting one fingernail at a time. We cut one fingernail, you get to keep playing, you get to keep doing your favorite thing, and then maybe a couple hours later or even the next day, we cut one more fingernail. The goal is that we build up, right? And we can cut all 10 fingernails at the same time. It's a quick and easy process, but we might need to start really small to make that goal seem attainable for our kids and just to set them up for success, as well as to set us up for success. Same thing with eating. So maybe initially we're just looking for them to lick a strawberry. You don't have to chew it. You don't even have to put it in your mouth. You don't have to swallow it, or even picking up the strawberry, touching it. Some kids might not tolerate it being on their plate. So maybe the expectation initially is just it's on the table and you're looking at it. Nobody's asking you to eat it. Nobody's asking you to touch it. It's just there in your presence. And that might be kind of good enough for now before we make it a little bit harder. Or with cleaning up, maybe initially the expectation when we're shaping is that they just hear the words clean up. Maybe that's an unpreferred phrase, and they hear the words clean up and they don't have to do anything. You clean up for them. And that's kind of enough to start. And then from there, maybe the expectation is, you say clean up and they put one thing away, and that's great. You're all done. Again, with the eventual goal that when the instruction is clean up, or the expectation is to clean up, they're cleaning up maybe everything in the environment that needs to be cleaned up. Reinforcement is also huge. So again, reinforcement with eating, reinforcement in general. Reinforcement is when you add or take something away that increases the probability that the behavior will occur more in the future. So it's the most powerful way to change behavior. We use it all the time, not only in ABA, but in all of our lives constantly. It works quickly. We can start really small, and then we can build momentum with small positive changes. So some examples might be, you ask your child to clean up and they clean up and you tell them, great job cleaning up. And maybe you give them tickles because you know they love tickles. Or they're sitting and playing quietly with their toys, and sitting and playing for long durations might be something that's challenging to them. And you might use praise and say, I love how you're playing with your toys, or you're doing such a good job sitting. Or they try new food for the first time. Maybe they try a little piece of a strawberry and you provide them with a lot of praise, tickles, you make a silly face that you know they love. Maybe you let them watch their favorite show after. And then looking at effectiveness. So I chatted a little bit about this previously, but really the most effective way to address feeding issues is using what we call a multidisciplinary approach. So we always want to rule out those medical causes. If there is an underlying medical condition and we haven't identified it, these behavioral strategies, these occupational therapy strategies, these speech therapies will not be successful. And we might hit some roadblocks and really might leave you feeling pretty frustrated. So again, we always want to rule out those medical causes, but then looking at a behavioral approach. So thinking about how we can incorporate BCBAs, behavior therapists, looking at how speech therapists can play a role, and then occupational therapists as well. So the role of these providers at Bierman, behavior analyst or a BCBA. We use a lot of research on feeding issues that look at topics such as expanding preferences, decreasing interfering behavior, maybe pocketing, so leaving food in your cheek for long durations instead of chewing and swallowing. We can design specific interventions to focus on improving eating-related behavior. And we might work on that initially in the center setting and then do some parent training either in home or at the center, really looking at how we can generalize that skill and make sure that our kids are not only, trying this new food in the center or sitting during meal times in the center, but they're also doing it at home. They're also doing it in the community. They're also doing it at their aunt and uncle's houses. And once we develop that consistent, effective strategy, we really want to make sure that it's being implemented across all of those settings. The behavior technicians, so BT or RBT, they're the ones who are really implementing this on a daily basis. So they are facilitating the practice. And they're really important in that they're giving the BCBA feedback on a consistent basis about what's going well, what's not going well, just any observations that they've had about the feeding strategies is really effective in making sure that we're making those changes and making sure that the interventions are successful. And then occupational therapists. So the occupational therapists also collaborate with families and the behavior analyst. They might be really looking at motor feeding skills. So sitting, fine motor abilities, so things like self-feeding, or the prerequisite skills to be successful with self-feeding. They also might use modified utensils or cups and bowls. All of these things might be helpful in increasing our kids' success, again, with the end goal of moving toward traditional utensils or traditional bowls. Proper sitting positions and chairs can be really important, so they might suggest accommodations to seating, maybe like wiggle seats or like a band on the bottom of the chair, fidget toys, anything that we could incorporate into the mealtime experience that might increase the likelihood that our kids are sitting for longer durations and it's a little bit easier for them to sit for those durations. Similarly to looking at like the height of the chair, the height of the table, all of those things can be really important in increasing the likelihood that our kids are successful during meal times. And then a speech and language pathologist or an SLP. They, again, work collaboratively with the family, the behavior analyst, the occupational therapist. We really look at, the behavioral approach. We look at the motor planning approach. We look at like the oral motor piece of it, the sensory piece, which OTs work on as well. And they can help develop those oral motor skills needed for different types of foods. So liquids, purees, solid foods, chewing, swallowing are all really things that they can assist with. They might make recommendations for building these skills, and also help out with letting us know if maybe it's not safe right now for a child to be eating large, crunchy foods because they don't have the prerequisite chewing skills, giving us some strategies as to how we can get there. So what can you do at home for picky eaters? So to get started, again, talking to your child's pediatrician, you might need to set up a consult with a gastroenterologist, a swallowing study, a feeding evaluation. There might need to be some additional medical providers that we want to get involved, just to, again, rule out those medical causes. Two, setting up consistent mealtime routines and expectations. So consistency across anything we're doing with our kids is really important. And making sure that you're setting goals that are attainable for you as well. So it can be really challenging if your goal is that my child's going to sit for 30 minutes every meal every day, and then life happens and you have other kids, you have a job, you have 12 other things to do, and you set this pretty big goal for yourself and you didn't meet it, and that can be really frustrating, and it can be hard to kind of restart. So maybe even setting, I always recommend to families, maybe it's a small goal initially. Maybe it's just that on Saturdays and Sundays, here's the expectation, because I know on Saturdays and Sundays I have a little bit more time, I have a little bit more flexibility, I know it's a little bit more attainable. And then again, with a larger goal of that being that every day during every mealtime across every setting, here's the expectation. And then finally, trying a few interventions during these new routines to kind of systematically expose your child to new foods and new experiences, and reaching out to a speech and occupational therapist for help with strengthening fine motor and oral motor skills in conjunction with everything you're doing at home can be very beneficial. All right. First thing we want to chat about is setting everybody up for success. So really trying to limit snacking throughout the day. A lot of kids that I work with are grazers, and families report, they would snack all day if you let them, and then it's mealtime and they are not interested. They're probably, potentially not that hungry, and also just less interested in eating a piece of chicken when you've been eating Cheez-Its and popcorn for the past 3 hours. And also know that those Cheez-Its and popcorn might be available again later if you don't eat your chicken. So really looking at how we can make sure that our kids are a little bit more hungry during mealtime. And again, not to say that they shouldn't ever have snacks, right? They're kids and they're growing and they're hungry. But maybe making sure that they're spaced far enough away from mealtime that they might be a little bit more hungry during mealtime versus they ate a snack 15 minutes ago and now it's dinner time. They might be a little bit less motivated to eat this less preferred food. Thinking about limiting distractors at the table if possible. So again, a lot of kids that I've worked with might be really dependent on iPads or TV or tablets, things like that during mealtime, but it can be interfering with their ability to listen to hunger cues. And they might, be so distracted in what they're watching that they might not realize they're hungry. And it can just make mealtime really long as well sometimes. So again, you might need to start small here. Maybe initially you go from they have the iPad during their entire mealtime, and you cut it down to whatever, 95% of mealtime versus going from all to nothing, because that might cause some additional behavioral challenges. If the expectation is always that I have my iPad during dinner and now all of a sudden I don't get my iPad at all, we might see some additional behavioral challenges. And then setting up consistent meal time. So deciding when and what, and then your child decides how much. So really trying to look at how we can make those times during the day really consistent. And maybe they just take small bites of the meal. And it's not the expectation that they sit and they eat the whole meal with you, but they have 1 or 2 bites of the family meal. Which goes into our next way to set up for success, incorporating family style meals. So maybe your child won't eat everything that's prepared, but again, just tolerating that they're at a table where there's a whole bunch of things that maybe they are not interested in eating. You have those Brussels sprouts on the table, you have that meat that they've never eaten before. And again, the expectation isn't that they're eating it necessarily, but they're participating in the family meal in their own way to start, with the end goal that maybe they are trying some of these foods, but really that repeated exposure is a great way to start to see more success. And seeing that modeling, right? Maybe they really love their brother or they really love their cousin and they see their cousin eating the food, they see their brother eating the food. We see that a lot in the center-based setting, parents reporting that their child won't eat certain foods at home, and then they come to the center and they see their favorite peer eating something, and we let the parents know that, Johnny seemed really interested in the Lunchable that his peer was eating, and the mom sends a Lunchable in, and then a week later he's eating Lunchables too, when that's something in the past that he previously would not have been interested in. So that can be a really cool way just to get some buy-in. And then it's really important that we remember that it can take many, 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 many exposures to develop a preference for a food and to know whether or not we like it or not. So the research shows that it can take more than 10 exposures to develop a preference for a new food. So don't feel discouraged. Don't maybe present it 10 times in one day. Maybe you present it once, you let them explore the food a little bit, and then you try it again a week later. And really just letting them kind of touch the food, smell the food, tolerate it on their plate, even if they're not actively consuming the food, just giving them the opportunity to explore whether or not they like that food. So some ways that we might slowly incorporate new foods that we'll chat a little bit about: making it fun, starting small, literally, making slow changes to texture, color, shape, combining new and preferred foods together, and then again, reinforcement. So some ways that we might make it fun: incorporating dips. If your child really likes particular dips, so I used to work with a child who loved, loved, loved ranch dressing, and you could put ranch dressing on anything and he would eat it. So we really initially worked on getting him to try some new foods with as much ranch dressing on them as he wanted. And then we worked on systematically decreasing the amount of ranch dressing he had on that food. So pizza, carrots, popcorn, you name it, we probably put ranch dressing on it, and he tried it all. And then we were able to fade out that ranch dressing where he wasn't eating it with every food at every meal, and he developed a preference for some of those foods. Playing with your food. So making mealtime really fun and interesting. Sometimes when we set up this expectation of um, that you have to eat this food or you're going to eat this food, that can be really aversive and hard for our kids, versus making it more of like a play activity where the French toast is jumping into a syrup swimming pool, you're wearing a veggie straw as a mustache, just like we do with infants with making a spoon an airplane. We can do that with older kids as well, just making it silly, making it really low pressure. And then if they happen to eat it, great. If they don't, that's also okay. Um, playing with yogurt, maybe as like a sensory shaving cream or in like a sensory bin kind of a way. Really being willing to like get messy and have fun. Using finger foods in small pieces. So that allows a child to be independent. That can be really important. Again, thinking about that adult-led piece, and thinking about incorporating things like playing with your food sometimes when it's an instruction, when it's adult-led, when it's really not within their control. I find that that can be really challenging for kids. So if we're giving them finger food, small pieces, we're not, picking the fork up and putting the fork in their mouth with the food, we might see a little bit more buy-in where they might be more inclined, because again, it's a little bit more on their terms and they're a little bit more autonomous in the process. Adding food coloring is another great way to maybe get some buy-in. So who doesn't love a red heart-shaped pancake on Valentine's Day? Who doesn't love a rainbow bagel? So really looking at how we can make the food look a little bit more interesting. On the opposite side, know your kid. I also think that there's many kids who would be maybe horrified by a red pancake or horrified by a rainbow bagel, and they just want their tan foods. But really, again, knowing your kid and knowing what might be fun and interesting to them and make it look a little bit less like, this is an instruction, this is something somebody wants me to do, this is really boring, versus look at this cool rainbow bagel, I might be interested in sampling that. And then eating with them or pretending with toys. So really being able to model some of those good behaviors. We see a lot of our kids like to model or like to imitate rather our behavior. They like to imitate maybe their siblings. So maybe their siblings would be willing to be part of this process. So trying new foods, having siblings try new foods and really kind of talking up how good they are. Maybe bringing a favorite doll, or I've had a lot of success with a child with Mickey Mouse eats the food first, and then we see a lot more buy-in when it's Mickey eating it, even over like a peer or an adult in the environment.
Hillary, we had a question come in. Should parents still keep food on the plate that they know their kids won't eat? Is it helping, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's really, really, really hard and you're seeing like really big emotional responding, maybe it's not on their plate, right? Maybe it's a couple feet away from them. Maybe it's on your plate, because I've worked with clients as well, where they have a really hard time even tolerating the food in sight. So not necessarily on their plate, but they don't even want it on your plate either. So if it's really, really hard, maybe it's on your plate, maybe it's just on the counter. It's not quite as close to them. But if they're just not eating it, kind of eating around it, but they're okay with it on their plate, I would definitely leave it there. Maybe a little bit of like the flavor got into another food, or maybe they're really distracted and they might pick it up and try it by accident. You might have some really positive outcomes. Um, so chatting about starting small. So really looking at how we can focus on size to make this a little bit easier for our kids. Almost everything is less overwhelming when it's tiny. I think of like my own work tasks, right? If I have a something to do for work that I know might take me 5 hours and has 10 different parts, I might think about it in, one of those 10 parts initially, or I might think of 30 minutes of it. So we all every day, I think, break these large tasks that may be really daunting into these smaller tasks, and it makes them more attainable. So rather than putting a whole piece of grilled chicken on your child's plate and they hate grilled chicken, they've never tried it, they're really going to have a hard time eating it. Maybe it's just a piece of chicken like the size of a quarter on their plate initially, and just making it look like a little bit of a smaller goal. So you'll see the plate on the visual on the left is a bunch of small pieces of 5 different foods. Then it's also quicker to eat each piece. So if you're using some sort of reinforcement system, you can reinforce eating a teeny tiny bite. So maybe they eat, again, a piece of chicken, to use that example, the size of a fingernail initially, and then we give them a piece of something they really, really like, a piece of a cookie, with the goal being that one day they have a whole piece of chicken on their plate and they're eating that whole piece of chicken. But it can just really reduce the effort to try these new things. It can also be helpful for kids that may gag due to new smells. If there's just a small piece of something on the plate, the smell will be much less than if there's a whole plate of Brussels sprouts. Also providing several pieces on a plate for them to choose from. So again, maybe the expectation is not that you have to eat chicken, but maybe we put a little piece of chicken, a little piece of broccoli, a little piece of pasta that they don't typically prefer the shape of, and one more food on a plate. So they have some choices. Again, that autonomy can be really helpful. And maybe that's where we start, again, with the end goal that they try everything on that plate. But right now we can celebrate that they tried the piece of chicken on the plate. The next thing you can look at is creating slow changes. So this is really helpful for kids who have trouble with generalization. So maybe they only like drinking water out of a very specific bottle and it has to be the same brand, the same color. Maybe they only eat a red pepper, but they won't eat an orange, a yellow, or a green pepper. So some of these more of like food rigidities about color, about texture, really creating these slow changes can be helpful. You'll probably know best which aspects are the biggest roadblock. So you probably can identify if color is hard, if shape is hard, if texture is hard, or if liquids are hard. Um, Color again might be the same food but a different color. Maybe multicolor goldfish versus white ones versus yellow cheddar. They all taste pretty similar. Or we might think they all taste pretty similar, but that might be really hard for our kids to try a different color goldfish. We might want to move toward changing, picking a food that's similar to or similar in color to food that they already eat. So beige crackers, maybe a beige dried apple. It's a similar texture. It might be a similar size and shape. So again, just kind of changing one dimension of what they normally eat. Texture can be a huge challenge. So maybe mushy is not really preferred. Maybe we start with something solid and then move toward a different texture. So a classic example would be maybe they eat apple slices, but they don't eat applesauce, and that's a goal for you. So initially they're eating apple slices, then maybe we move to like dried apple crisps, and then we move to applesauce. So really looking at going from most crunchy to like moderately crunchy to a completely soft food. Or maybe there's apple slices in the applesauce. So we're really like pairing those two textures together. We can change the shape, right? So maybe Ritz crackers are their favorite, round Ritz crackers. We'll stay in that cracker genre, but we might look at rectangular townhouse crackers or square saltines. So it looks pretty similar. It's a similar color. It tastes similar enough, but we're really looking at changing the shape. Or maybe utilizing different packaging. Maybe we put it in a Ziploc bag instead of its original container. And then trying fun and different shapes. So again, cutting a sandwich into a dinosaur shape versus just a regular square sandwich. We might get a little bit more buy-in if your kid really loves dinosaurs. And then with liquids, so I see a lot too of resistance to maybe drinking water or trying new liquids. So we might do something called volume fading, where we slowly dilute the current drink with the new drink. So maybe they only drink juice, and initially we put a tablespoon of water in the juice, and then we systematically build up where it's maybe 50-50. And then at some point, it's just water and there's no more juice in it. And that can be a really successful way. And it's a process, right? It might take a while. That's why it's one of our slow changes, but being really patient and really identifying maybe where that kind of sweet spot is, because our end goal again is that our kids are drinking just water, but even if we can move to 50% water, 50% juice, that's a lot more water than they were probably drinking previously. So that's something that we can celebrate. Maybe that's a spot that we can live in for a little while we work on expanding. And then we can also look at taking a preferred food and adding something new to it. So it could be something hidden, like maybe they love smoothies and you put an avocado or spinach in the smoothie. It still tastes pretty similar. You probably can't taste that avocado and spinach if you put enough fruit in there to balance it out. Or it might be obvious. Maybe you add a piece of broccoli to their mac and cheese. You put peanut butter on apple slices. They love crackers, and we try a little piece of cheese on those crackers. Kids usually, even if we try those subtle changes, right, like spinach to a smoothie, it usually makes the smoothie green. Maybe we can mask it in a water bottle that's opaque, so they can't see that it's green. And we might get some buy-in that way. But we really might have to be a little bit patient in this process as well. And there are times where this disclaimer too might negatively impact eating a food that they previously ate, because they might not trust so much that the food is going to taste the same way, even if you remove this added component. And then back to reinforcement. So again, during any of these strategies, reinforcement is really, really, really crucial. So we always want to celebrate those small victories and those steps forward in the process. So really looking at taking bites and swallowing new foods, again, even touching new foods, smelling new foods, licking new foods. If they've never done that before, we want to celebrate that. We want to throw a party, make a big deal out of that, give them tickles, pick them up, give them squeezes, whatever makes them really happy. We want to incorporate that so that we increase the likelihood that in the future we see more of that. Positive mealtime behaviors too are something that we can reinforce. So again, maybe right now your child only tolerates sitting for 30 seconds, but you're working on a minute and they're sitting for a minute. We want to celebrate that. Tolerating new foods on a plate. Maybe you put a new food on their plate and typically they throw the food, and this time they don't throw it. They leave it there. That's really exciting. Again, it's not that terminal goal, but it's a step forward in the process, and it's something that you can celebrate. And then choosing a reinforcer. So again, making sure it really is a reinforcer. So the way we know it's a reinforcer is that it increases the future likelihood that that behavior will occur again. So this will give us our best shot at making sure that we see more of that desired behavior. And you might want to maybe what we call reserve things. So maybe you save their most favorite thing for meal times. And when you see any of these positive mealtime behaviors, they get access to their most favorite doll or fruit snacks, and they don't typically get fruit snacks. So really starting again, easy, starting with those small goals, anything that's new and anything that's movement in the desired direction, we probably want to reinforce initially, maybe after each bite. And then once you see more success, maybe we want to what we call thin the schedule of reinforcement. So make it less, basically, where then we want them to take several bites, right? And then maybe eventually it's after the whole meal time they get that reinforcement. And then one day they're just eating the foods. Maybe you're telling them good job or incorporating a little bit of praise, but they're not getting access to that really highly preferred thing. But again, being really mindful when you're using reinforcement and not pushing it too much, looking for those behaviors indicating that maybe we need to increase the reinforcement, maybe we need to up the ante a little bit, or maybe this item is not functioning as a reinforcer. Maybe, I thought they really loved this item, but they don't seem to really care about it right now. We got to try something else.
Hillary, I had a question come in. My daughter's appetite changes a lot and her preferences change. Her preference changes every few months or so. How do we know if she is full, if she cannot tell or communicate clearly?
Yeah, that can be really challenging. I think that that would be maybe a time where we would want to get a medical professional involved in making sure that is she like meeting her milestones in terms of development, and is the doctor concerned about like if there's blood work done, or is the doctor concerned about her development? And if they're not, then just making food kind of freely available and letting her let you know if she's hungry or not, and continuing to try those new foods. So a couple of wrap ups again, those main points. Really, again, ruling out medical needs first. We want to make sure that doctors are involved and are giving us guidance about, if they're telling us that maybe a child is failure to thrive and we might need a more aggressive intervention or we might need a medical intervention. Behavioral strategies will not work if there's underlying medical causes, and we would need to really loop in a doctor and figure out how we can address those medical causes before putting these multidisciplinary approaches in. Using that multidisciplinary approach if you can. So if your child has a speech therapist, if your child has an occupational therapist, access to BCBAs, behavior technicians, we really all work best as a team in looking at how there could be challenges across a variety of areas. So things like chewing and swallowing, sensory defensiveness, maybe just resistant to like adult-led activities. We really want to be able to incorporate all of those things. Create some new expectations at home, 1 or 2 at a time. So we don't want to change 12 things about mealtime for our kids or 12 things about eating expectations. That can be really challenging, and that may result in our kids not eating at all, or just some new unexpected mealtime behaviors that may be difficult to navigate. So really looking at I think what's attainable for you. So looking at some of these strategies and figuring out like what's something that I'm going to be able to stick with consistently across a period of time, and what's something that I think my child might be most successful with, I think can be a really helpful strategy. And then trying some new techniques. So again, adding some new changes, adding new foods, but being really mindful of how many things we're changing at once. So if a child is only likes eating on this one particular plate and is eating 3 foods and not sitting for mealtime, that's a lot of different challenges that are occurring. So maybe we're just going to pick one. Maybe the most significant goal right now is that you really want them to sit for a longer duration. So we keep the plate, we keep the 3 foods, and then we just try to provide reinforcement for sitting longer. Or maybe the variety is really what we're looking at. So we probably don't want to think about getting them to sit and changing their plate and giving them new foods to try, because that can be really, really, really overwhelming. It might be challenging for kids, and then again, challenging for you, and that if it's not successful, we might be more likely to stop trying. And then again, don't give up. Multiple exposures are required. So even if it doesn't work once, that's not to say it won't work the second, third, fourth, fifth time. So patience is really important. Just giving our kids the opportunity to kind of get used to this change, and giving them time to adjust and be exposed and try new things. So references, this book, Broccoli Boot Camp, is a really, really, really incredible book. I believe the people who wrote it, Keith Williams, has another book. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But if you look him up, his books are really helpful. And I've recommended them to quite a few families that I've worked with. They're very, I think, just like reader friendly. They're not too technical. And they've just been really helpful in changing some mealtime behavior. And then it looks like we have a couple questions.
Yes. What about vitamins to help supplement for nutrient deficiencies?
Yeah. So that again would be something I would chat with your doctor about. I certainly have worked with a lot of families whose kids have benefited from supplements, but just really making sure that the supplements are recommended by a doctor, and looping in, if you do work with a BCBA, if you work with like a team of practitioners, an SLP and OT, letting everybody know about the supplements as well, because there are some supplements that may cause some side effects that we would want to be aware of.
I have one more right. My son will sometimes only eat certain foods if it's on my plate. When I offer him on his own, he doesn't want it. Any way to navigate?
Yeah, so he will eat foods on your plate, but not his own plate. An initial way I would try maybe bridging that gap would be putting the food on both of your plates. So letting him eat it from your plate, but just having it visible and available on his plate as well. You could try also starting to move the plates like a little bit closer together to bridge that gap. Um, those would be the places I would probably start.
Thanks. Let's see, once, I think this was the follow-up, I apologize. Said for like, he will not take water if I put it in his cup, but he'll take water when I'm drinking it. Same with yogurt.
I
Um,
wonder, is it only you or is there anybody else um that he'll do it with?
says, I think only me.
Okay. I would be curious. I would see if you can find out maybe if it's he will do it with anybody else because I think that might be a good way to kind of generalize it initially. Um seeing if it again identifying if it is just you or if it's you or other people. And maybe right now like that's where um you live for lack of a better word. I know again that's not something that you want forever, but if you are able to increase the foods that he eats, like the variety of foods and maybe even the quantity of foods that he's eating right now, um, it's hard without having more information to identify if it's like a rigidity or kind of the why behind it's happening. Um, but if it is a rigidity, it might be something that, he might grow out of. So there's a couple things that we would want to look at. But if you do have access to a BCBA, that would be a really good thing to collaborate with them on. I think somebody raised their hand. Hi.
Hope I'm saying your name right. Alex, if you would still like to ask your question, you are able to unmute yourself.
Oh, it looks like there's something in the chat.
Oh, you might have
Been an error.
maybe any other. Oh, how important is how important to sit and eat at the table only? My daughter only it sits on the couch.
I think that's really like a family and parent preference. I think you'll really get varying responses to that. Um, I personally think that it's really more important that our kids are eating nutritious foods, a variety of foods, and enough foods. Again, so that to support their sleep, to support their availability for learning, that's typically the first place I start. Of course, if a family has a different preference, if sitting at a table is really their biggest priority, they don't really mind if it decreases the amount of food their child's eating, if it might impact the variety. We really want to, work in a collaborative way, and that would be something that I might address. But I would say the only barrier might be if your daughter is going to other places like daycare or school, or places where there's not like a couch with a TV for her to eat at, is she still eating? And if she's not, that might be a barrier versus if it's specific to home. That's just, this is where I sit and eat at home. I know plenty of adults who sit and eat their dinner on the couch with the TV. So I think that's really like something that you have to decide as a family and decide what's important for your daughter. And if it's impacting the like quantity of food she's eating, and her overall nutrition and her ability to eat in a variety of places, I would say it's potentially a little bit more important than if it's just at home, like that's her spot where she eats, and you don't mind that she's eating on the couch. Um, I wouldn't necessarily like target that as a behavior to change.
Hillary, is saving food in your mouth throughout the day, can that be harmful? Do you
Yeah,
have?
so we call that pocketing, and it can be dangerous. So it sounds like keeping food in your cheek, and that's what we call pocketing. So just leaving it there and not swallowing. It really depends on what the food is. Some foods dissolve and won't cause a choking hazard, but there are some foods that won't dissolve and could be a choking hazard. So that might be something that you might want to think about when picking what foods that your child's eating if they are pocketing.
What are the next steps when none of the feeding strategies have taken? Like feeding therapy caused night terrors, so we stopped.
I would really probably consult with a medical doctor again to look at like what the severity of the feeding challenges are. I've worked with quite a few kids who have a very, very, very limited diet, which can be again impactful in in the way that it makes it hard for families to go out to eat or celebrate holidays or eat a meal together. But medical professionals have not ruled out any or have ruled out that it's causing any sort of like malnutrition. In which case, you know, it still might be hard for the family and for our kids. Um, but if we're not hearing from a medical doctor that it's impacting their overall health and well-being, and you found that things like feeding therapy were causing night terrors, which you know can be really impactful of your health and well-being, that would be kind of where I would make that decision, if it were my child.
Thanks, Hillary. I think we are all wrapped up for the evening. We appreciate everyone coming. We will send out an email tomorrow with the recording because Hillary gave us such wonderful information. I'm going to listen to it many times over. But for anybody who needs anything, and we'll be able to provide a recap for you guys tomorrow. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to our client intake team. Their email address, and I will also put it in the chat, is start@biermanautism.com. And they would be happy to help you. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Have a good rest of your night. Thank you.